you have a problem with a wobbly attachment? Is it making it hard for you to perform in your gym? Well, then it may be time to consult your doctor about shims. Just 3 daily shims, you can go from wobbly to rock hard in just half an hour. Well, if you're like me, then you probably really hate having sloppy attachments on your rack. Well, today we're gonna try and fix that with some permanent shims in the attachment to make it fit nice and snug on your rack, whether it's a 75mm or if it's a true 3x3. Now, in many cases, the main cause of this wobbliness is that there are two different types of racks out there. There's the true 3x3s, and then we have the 75x75mm, which are about 1.2mm smaller. So a lot of manufacturers end up making the attachments big enough to accommodate both. So that makes the wobbliness problem worse for the 75x75mm racks. And on top of that, some manufacturers just have sloppy manufacturing, and as a result, you just get a lot of this. So the solution is to add some material between the steel and the UHMW plastic of your attachment so that we can get rid of a lot of this play and have it fit nice and tight on your upright. All right, so the next step is very important, which is we want to do some rough testing of our shimming before we actually start to unbolt things and take things apart. I've cut out a few shims here that are just random pieces that I can fit in there. So I can fiddle around with this attachment by just sticking these shims between the rack and the UHMW. This is obviously not going to be the final configuration, because in the final version, we're going to put the shims between the UHMW and the steel of the attachment. But just to do some quick testing, we're going to test it between the UHMW and the rack, like so, just to make sure we calculate the right amount of shimming that we need. Maybe we need more on one side or different side, and also make sure we don't have any issues putting the pin in and out. So that's what we're going to do next. The next thing you may be wondering about is, what is this actual shimming material? Well, it's a flexible cutting board. I bought a 5-pack of these on Amazon for 10 bucks. I'll put a link down in the description below. And they claim they're 1mm thick. After testing it out, I can cut it pretty easily with some garden shears. So let's put them in our caliper really quick and see if they are indeed 1mm. And it looks like that's 0.95mm. So that's pretty close. And we're gonna try and use that since I have, over 4mm I need to shim. That being said, if you have less space that you need to shim on each side, you can use other materials and tricks. For example, you could even do something like layer on electrical tape between the steel and the UHMW in order to create as much distance in more precise measurements than 1mm if your tolerances are more tight. All right, so I'm going to start working on the side-to-side wobbling here first, because that's going to be easier to deal with since I got two sides to work with. We obviously have to be mindful that there's a pin in here. We're going to have to kind of work around that just to see, but just to start, I'm going to take this piece here and kind of wiggle this as I insert it on this side and see how the wobble is. It's still pretty wobbly, so we've added 1mm right now. So I'm going to do the same thing and add, wow, this is really loose here. So we've added another millimeter here on this side, and there's still quite a bit of wobble. So I think it can take more. I'm going to take another one and add a 3rd millimeter here. Now it is getting a little bit tight, so I probably have to wiggle this a bit just to see how it feels. We don't want to make things potentially too tight, because then we don't want it to be difficult to put the attachment on and off. Right, so right now we have about 3mm shimming with 2 here and 1 here, and it does seem like side to side it's much more stable now. Is it easy to move back and forth? So it is, still moves back and forth. So it looks like we'll need to add about 2mm on one side here and 1 millimeter on the other side. Now, doing the forward and back wobble is a little bit trickier, and we don't want to, introduce some kind of an alignment option that's going to make inserting this pin in and out more difficult. Take this pin out and just slide this guy up in here. So we have millimeter. Add it here. Make it tight. Make sure our pin still goes in. So our shim is in here, and let's see. There's still a little bit of play in here, but I'm concerned if we make it too tight that I'm going to start to have trouble putting this pin in and out. So just for science, I'm going to try 1 more millimeter just to confirm my assumptions. Let's see what happens now. And as I suspected now, I'm having a lot of trouble putting this pin in, so I think 2 millimeters in the front is going to be too much. So yeah, it's important to, you can see, test these things out as much as possible before we start to take things apart. All right, that goes in there nice and snug. So I think this is going to be our final configuration. Alrighty, so the next step is we're going to take off these UHMW pads here, and then we're going to make precise outlines on our shimming material and cut and drill those to fit the UHMW pads. If you're enjoying watching this tutorial, just a quick reminder to please smash that subscribe button, because I really need to pump those rookie subscriber numbers up. Now, getting these side ones can be a little more tricky because obviously we can't put a long screwdriver in here, so I recommend doing something like getting a Phillips attachment for your ratchet so that you can get your ratchet in here. There they are. All right. Alrighty, now we're in my garage at the workbench, and what we're going to do now is trace our UHMW pads so that we can cut out our shims in the exact shape that we need. Plastic, but enough pressure on a few passes. Now for the challenging part, which is cutting it out. Now mind you, these are cutting boards, so you think they'll be somewhat resistant to blades cutting them. Yeah. Good thing these are crappy cutting boards. Ta-da! Okay, now let's drill some holes. Okay, so a drill press may not actually be the best tool to do this because it does munge up the plastic quite a bit. Okay, this one I got munged up a bit. I'm just going to clean up with the X-Acto knife. There. So that's how you can just use an X-Acto knife. Okay, I'm just going to cut out these big holes by hand because it's a pain in the butt to set up the drill press, and I think I'd have to do a bunch of cleanup anyway. and I also want these to be bigger than the actual pinholes, so by hand it is. Okay, we're about done with all 3 of our side shims. Okay, now we've got one more to make, which is for our front shim. Alrighty, let's see if all of that arts and crafts work paid off. Let's put our bolts on. Okay, that one's on. Now let's do these guys. So one of the sides needs a double. Hopefully there's enough bolt length there. Hey guys, here's the result of all of our hard work. We got our shims in there. And now let's get ready for the moment of truth. Here we go. It's a little too snug. So, plan B. Well, unfortunately, it looks like adding 2 shims here is a bit too much, but 1 is probably not going to be enough. So what I'm going to do is take this one off and then probably add a little bit of electric tape to the back of one shim just to get it to about 1.5 millimeter, where again, I want it to be just kind of a little snug, but not too tight. Okay, so just to see what's going on here, I'm going to grab my caliper and see just how thick 2 of these measure. So it's measuring at 1.9 millimeters, about what we expect. I think I want to get this to about 1.4, maybe 1.3. That's kind of my gut estimate. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm just gonna start taking a couple of pieces of this electric tape, and I'm just gonna start applying some. You don't want to cover any of the holes. So what I've done here is I've got 3 layers of electric tape applied here just to test the thickness. I'm gonna use my caliper, and it looks like that gets us to about 1.5 millimeters, which is where we want to be. So I'm going to apply some more electric tape around here and see if that gives us about the right tolerance to be tight, but not too tight. All right, guys. So here is what shim version 2 looks like. Each one of these places where you see electrical tape is 3 layers tape thick. So hopefully that will get us just the right amount of thickness to make this shim just snug enough. All right, here we go. Moment of truth, number 2. Boom. Ta-da! Yeah. Now let's try to rock it side to side. Pretty solid. Yeah, see, the only movement we have is now here at the bearing, which, you know, we can't do much about that. But there is no more side to side movement here. And, you know, there's maybe like a tiny bit of play up and down, which again, we can't really do much about that due to the pin. But let's see again how easy it is to take in and out. So not too much of a struggle, obviously a little bit tighter than before, but overall goes on pretty easily, stays on snug. Boom. All right, now let's try doing a couple of movements with our attachment. Yep, it's pretty solid. All right, so let's try it for some rows. So we've learned a couple of I think useful lessons today. Lesson number 1 is sometimes, as much as planning and measuring you do ahead of time, you still run into snags when you're putting it all together, and you have to adapt and iterate. The other thing we learned is you probably need to back off from your initial measurements by at least 1/2 to 1 millimeter in order to give enough play to actually be able to take your attachment on and off. And yeah, hopefully this was a useful tutorial for you guys. If you liked the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps the channel so I can grow. And see you in the next one.